All worlds begin with Demon Slayer. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 976, The Beginning of the Nightmare. That smile seemed to tell Kirishima Taoka that your objection was useless. That's right, Tsukiyama's joining will help us share some of the pressure, and the possibility of rescuing Kaneki-ken will also be greatly increased. Besides, as a fellow, I'm more relieved. Yoshimura Kausen said at this time. The reason why Tsukiyama came to help was that he was called by the store manager, and he volunteered to help. The reason for volunteering was also very simple, that is, Kaneki-ken was captured. Tsukiyama, who regarded Kaneki-ken as the most perfect food, naturally did not want to see Kaneki-ken fall into the hands of others, so Tsukiyama voluntarily requested to fight under the notice of Yoshimura Kausen. Of course, Tsukiyama-shu's help does not mean that Tsukiyama-shu is alone. With Tsukiyama-shu's ability, he can naturally gather the power of some families to participate in this action, which is why Yoshimura Kausen said that Tsukiyama-shu's joining can share some of the pressure for the antiques. It is naturally impossible to have such a big effect by relying on Tsukiyama-shu alone. If Tsukiyama-shu is really so powerful, he will not be abused by Bai Yu. Seeing that the arrangement had become a foregone conclusion, Kirishima Taoka could only say no more. Afterwards, Gudong also began to make detailed arrangements and discussions for the plan of this operation. Bai Yu didn't care much about this, because as a superdimensional traverser, Bai Yu already knew what the next result would be. Although his existence had changed things, Bai Yu knew that this critical turning point would be unlikely to change if he didn't intervene. Unless Bai Yu secretly rescued Kaneki-ken at this time, perhaps things would change dramatically. Moreover, the system did not issue a task to rescue Kaneki-ken. Judging from the system's reaction, Bai Yu also felt that he didn't need to pay too much attention to Kaneki-ken. On the other hand, Kaneki-ken, who was taken back to Area 11, was not so comfortable. After all, in the hands of a sadistic pervert like Gecko, naturally nothing good would happen. At this time, Kaneki-ken was tied to a chair, his hands were tied with thick iron chains, and his feet were also handcuffed. Kaneki-ken's feet were bare at this time, and his shoes had obviously been taken off. In addition, the trousers that were originally long pants had been torn off halfway, turning them into shorts. The same was true for the sleeves of the white shirt, and the upper body became a vest. Gecko looked at Kaneki-ken, whose eyes were gradually opening, and then began to organize the things on a medical cart. On the iron plate on this cart, there were many needles, scalpels, scissors, and the special huge medical pliers obtained from Fugashima Sato. In addition to these things, glass jars of unknown liquid were placed on the iron plate. There were still many dried blood stains on the iron plate. Judging from the situation, either Gecko had abused Kaneki-ken, or the iron plate had not been cleaned, and the blood on it was from the last poor man. Awake. My room is nice, isn't it? Because Dua Liang said you were of no use, I asked you to come here. Now that you're awake, I can finally entertain you. Gecko murmured as he extracted the unknown liquid from the glass jar with a needle. Chapter 977. What is 1000-7? Kaneki-ken opened his eyes and began to struggle subconsciously. Because of Kaneki-ken's struggle, the extremely quiet room suddenly rang with the sound of iron chains rubbing. What are you doing? Let me go. Let me go. Kaneki-ken's fear was magnified because he was in an unfamiliar environment. Hearing these noises, the Gecko couldn't help but get more excited because Kaneki-ken didn't expect that he would be so energetic after a good night's sleep. Such recovery ability is indeed rare. Then, the Gecko put on the mask. This is a very simple mask. There are not many designs on the mask. There are only 3 large holes at the position of the eyes and nose, and several rows of much smaller holes at the position of the mouth. This is something that the Gecko must wear when he abuses others, because after putting on this mask, the Gecko will become Jason. In addition to being another name for the Gecko, Jason is also another personality of the Gecko, and it is also a sadistic personality. Jason put on the mask and put his face in front of Kaneki-ken and then said excitedly, "Seeing you look so energetic, I'm really looking forward to playing with you." Kaneki Ken was sweating all over and subconsciously held his breath. Gekko showed the syringe in his hand, which was already filled with unknown liquid. Then Gekko pushed the syringe out, pushing out the excess air in a very professional way. The syringe contains the RC inhibitor. If you inject it into the body of a gal, it will prevent the Kagoon from being released. The Kagoon will fall into a dormant state and cannot be activated. In this way, your body will become like a normal human being, losing its resistance and super recovery ability. However, a needle cannot normally penetrate the body of a gal. However, there is a place where a needle can penetrate very easily, and that is the mucous membrane. So, Kaneki-kun, let's start with the mucous membrane, Jason said as he used his hand to open Kaneki-ken's eyelids. Kaneki-ken was extremely scared at this time, but he could only watch the needle approaching him little by little. Then, there was a miserable scream. Jason's hand was very steady, without any shaking. The RC inhibitor was injected into Kaneki-ken's body from the eyelid. Although Kaneki-ken was in terrible pain, he dared not move, and could only endure it. If he moved, if the needle broke, it would be Kaneki-ken who would suffer in the end. So Kaneki-ken could only endure it. After the RC inhibitor was injected, Jason pulled out the needle and threw the syringe back into the iron basin of the cart. Kaneki-ken soon felt his body become heavy and weak because of the effect of the RC inhibitor. Kaneki, what is 1000-7? At this time, the Gekko did not rush to abuse Kaneki-ken, but asked Kaneki-ken an arithmetic question. Kaneki-ken was still immersed in the fear just now. The stinging pain in his eyelid did not dissipate immediately, but accompanied Kaneki-ken. The eyelid of Kaneki-ken that was pierced by the needle was bleeding, and then slid down the eye socket to the cheek. Chapter 978 Kaneki-ken's plea. Seeing that Kaneki-ken didn't say anything, Jason couldn't help but urge him again. "Answer me, Kaneki-kun." At this time, Kaneki-ken's entire mind fell into a self-maintained closed state, and he was completely deaf to Jason's questions. Seeing that Kaneki-ken didn't answer, Jason immediately picked up the large iron pliers in the iron plate, then squatted down, and then Jason clamped the little toe of Kaneki-ken's foot with the iron pliers, and finally pulled it hard. Kaneki-ken screamed again, because Kaneki-ken's little toe was pulled off by Jason with the pliers. The floor was immediately covered with blood, and then Jason put the severed finger into a pre-prepared iron bucket. "What is 1000-7? Jason asked again. Kaneki-ken, who had regained a bit of rationality due to the pain, finally answered, 993. Keep subtracting 7 and counting. Gekko was satisfied after hearing Kaneki-ken's answer, and then signaled Kaneki-ken to subtract 7 and count. 986, 97, 99, 72. Although Kaneki-ken didn't understand why Gekko asked him to count, Kaneki-ken was still afraid that Gekko would abuse him again, so he started counting according to Gekko's request. But Kaneki-ken thought Gekko was too kind. How could Gekko just want to listen to Kaneki-ken's counting? Before Kaneki-ken started counting a few times, Gekko used pliers to pull off another toe next to Kaneki-ken's little toe, and the pain immediately interrupted Kaneki-ken's counting. What a beautiful sound. Don't stop, keep counting. After hearing Kaneki-ken scream, Gekko saw that Kaneki-ken stopped calculating, and couldn't help but remind him again. "Please let me go. Please." Kaneki-ken begged with tears in his eyes. Kaneki-ken was originally a good boy who grew up in an ordinary family. He had never experienced such a thing before, so what Gekko did to him was just like a nightmare. Kaneki-ken has been living with his mother in District 20 since he was a child. Because of the stability of District 20, Kaneki-ken has never encountered any danger. In other words, at that time, Kaneki-ken was very lucky. Under the blessing of God, he grew up peacefully. However, this peace was broken after meeting Kamishiro Rise. Kaneki-ken never thought that his life would be like this, because he had never encountered the invasion of gals since he was a child. Kaneki-ken always thought that gals were far away from him, but the real situation was that gals were always by his side. Kaneki-ken's father was a writer. He died before Kaneki-ken was born. Fortunately, after his death, he left a house to his mother and Kaneki-ken, as well as the subsequent income from his works. Therefore, Kaneki Ken has been living with his mother since he was a child. Although the income from his father's works is the family's financial source, Kaneki Ken's mother is also a very kind and extremely soft-hearted woman. In this respect, Kaneki Ken is very similar to his mother. Kaneki Ken's aunt took advantage of this and often asked Kaneki Ken's mother for the income from his father's works for various reasons. Kaneki Ken's mother was not cruel enough, so she would hand over the money every time. Therefore, Kaneki Ken's mother often relied on several odd jobs to supplement the family income. In the end, Kaneki Ken's mother died suddenly at home due to overwork. Chapter 979 Torture. When Kaneki Ken's mother passed away, Kaneki Ken was still in elementary school. At that time, Kaneki Ken had already known Nagachi Karira, so after his mother passed away, Nagachi Karira became Kaneki Ken's most important and best roommate. After his mother passed away, Kaneki Ken's aunt never came again, and Kaneki Ken lived on the assistance of the Z government. Because he lost his mother and aunt's daughter door begging, Kaneki Ken's life was much calmer than before. It can be seen from Kaneki Ken's pleading with Gekko that Kaneki Ken's heart is still weak, which is indeed not as good as Kamado Tanjiro. Let you go? Why should I let you go? Do you think I'm a good person? Ha ha ha. Gekko laughed, and seeing Kaneki Ken's frightened look, Gekko suddenly leaned his face over again, and then comforted him. But don't be afraid, you won't die. Gekko's current purpose is just to abuse Kaneki Ken and satisfy his own evil taste, so Kaneki Ken is not in danger of life for the time being except for suffering. No. Kaneki Ken struggled violently, and the Gekko immediately picked up the scalpel in the iron plate and stabbed Kaneki Ken's thigh heavily. Another scream sounded, and Kaneki Ken stopped struggling. I don't like disobedient children. Now continue to count from the number just now. After giving Kaneki Ken a warning, the Gekko signaled him to continue the calculation just now. However, Kaneki Ken had long forgotten what number he had just said under the torture of pain, so when the Gekko asked him to count again, he had no way to speak. I forgot. Kaneki Ken replied fearfully. Hearing this, the Gekko immediately stabbed another scalpel into Kaneki Ken's other thigh, and then Kaneki Ken screamed again. Although the Gekko remembered the last number Kaneki Ken reported, the Gekko did not tell Kaneki Ken, but asked Kaneki Ken to start from 1000 again. Kaneki Ken could only start counting from 1000, while Gekko continued to torture Kaneki Ken. First the toes, then the fingers, and finally the teeth. After pulling out these things, Gekko used the pliers to knock on the bones of Kaneki Ken's knees and wrists. After doing this, Gekko ended the first round of torture on Kaneki Ken, and then put the pliers back into the iron plate and asked, how many counts have you made? Keep counting. Don't stop. 552,545,538 Kaneki. I will come again when you recover. Now you should have a good rest. After Gekko took off his mask, he left a sentence to Kaneki Ken, and then stood up and left the room where Kaneki Ken was imprisoned. Because Kaneki Ken was affected by the RC inhibitor, the damage to his body could not be restored. Only when the RC inhibitor no longer worked, Kaneki Ken's toes, fingers and teeth that were torn off would grow back. This is also the reason why the Gekko stopped for the time being. After all, there is nothing left for the Gekko to pluck out now, unless the Gekko gets a little more perverted and attacks the genitals. That would be another matter. Ordinary people would definitely not be able to recover after being abused like this, but the Gao is different. Even if it is the genitals, it can be restored. Chapter 980, Kind-hearted People. After the Gekko left, Kaneki Ken was still counting and had no intention of stopping. The black and white tile floor near where Kaneki Ken sat was already covered in blood, and Kaneki Ken looked very miserable at this time, and his mind had fallen into a very trance. At this time, a person wearing a red hooded robe, like a church member, walked into the room, and this person also had a mask of the god of death on his face, plus a mop and a bucket in his hands. At first glance, it really looked like the god of death came to claim his life. This person came in front of Kaneki Ken, and then used a mop to clean up the blood on the floor. After cleaning up the blood, the person took off his mask, and then called to Kaneki Ken, who was still counting with his head down. Kaneki. Kaneki-ken heard this familiar voice, and then stopped counting, and then looked up at the member of the bronze tree who was cleaning up the blood. Manjo Mister. The person who cleaned up the blood was Manjo number 1. Obviously, Manjo number 1, in addition to running errands, was also a miscellaneous person in the bronze tree. I will definitely find a chance to rescue you. Kaneki, you have to hold on for now, Manjo Shuchi said to Kaneki-ken. Hearing this, Kaneki-ken felt warm in his heart, but in fact, Kaneki-ken did not have much hope for Manjo Shuchi. After all, Manjo Shuchi was not as good as himself. How could he save himself? Did he secretly let himself go? If he was caught, both Manjo Shuchi and Kaneki-ken would probably lose their lives. Thank you. Although he did not hold out hope, Kaneki-ken still said thank you to Manjo Shuchi. The people who come here to take over the shift are my companions. If you need anything, just tell them. Manjo Shuchi left Kaneki-ken with these words and left. As the RC inhibitor no longer worked, Kaneki-ken's Kaki regained its vitality again. Compared with other gals, Kaneki-ken's recovery ability is much stronger, so Kaneki-ken's torn toes, fingers, teeth, and broken knees and wrists gradually recovered as before under the recovery of RC cells. In half a day, Kaneki-ken's body returned to its original state. And every time Kaneki-ken had just recovered, Gecko would come to cruelly abuse and infringe on Kaneki-ken again. After Gecko finished torturing Kaneki-ken again, he did not leave immediately, but took off his mask and praised Kaneki-ken. Kaneki-kun, you are really a great toy. Do you know why I'm so obsessed with you? The Gecko put his mouth close to Kaneki-ken's ear and then said again, I don't know if you have discovered that your recovery ability is much stronger than that of ordinary gals. This is actually thanks to Dr. Kano. The doctor is using Rise to create gals, so you have everything in Rise. Kaneki-ken listened, and his trembling body froze suddenly, because Dr. Kano was the doctor who performed the operation on him, and he was also the culprit who turned Kaneki-ken into this. Kaneki-ken did not expect that Gecko would know all this. Could it be that Gecko knew something hidden? I'm so obsessed with you because I don't like that bitch Rise. If I could have caught that bitch back then, I would definitely treat her well like this, or even toy with her. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 981, Centipede in the Air. The Gecko became more and more excited as he spoke, and finally laughed wildly. After laughing wildly, the Gecko calmed down and said, the smell on you always reminds me of that bitch. This makes me want to destroy you. Destroy you. After that, the Gecko took out a transparent glass jar from the iron plate. In the glass jar was a live centipede as long and thick as a pen. This live centipede was the dessert that the Gecko specially prepared for Kaneki-ken this time. The Gecko pinched the centipede in the glass jar in his hand. The centipede did not seem to bite the Gecko, but struggled to escape from the palm of the Gecko's hand. Kaneki, this golden-headed centipede is a gift I specially prepared for you this time. Do you like it? The Gecko showed the centipede in front of Kaneki-ken. Kaneki-ken looked at the golden-headed centipede nervously, not knowing what the Gecko was going to do with it. I'm going to put it in your ear. You're looking forward to it, right? The Gecko widened his eyes, and then the thumb of his other hand pressed on the joint of his index finger, and finally there was a crisp sound of bone breaking. After the Gecko broke the joint of his index finger, he pressed the middle finger and ring finger. This is a quirk that the Gecko has always had, and it is also a behavior that the Gecko often does. No, no, no. Kaneki-ken immediately repelled it, and Kaneki-ken's repulsion made the Gecko even more excited, arousing the Gecko's crazy heart. Then, regardless of Kaneki-ken's disagreement, the Gecko brought the golden-headed centipede close to Kaneki-ken's ear. The centipede originally liked the dark environment, so it took the initiative to drill into Kaneki-ken's ear. As the Gecko let go, the centipede drilled in completely, and the scene was extremely terrifying just to look at. The inside of the ear is a place where the nerves are extremely sensitive. When such a thing drills in, the stimulation is really not something that ordinary people can bear. Regardless of whether the centipede would bite Kaneki-ken, the feeling of the centipede crawling inside alone was enough to make people shudder. Kaneki-ken immediately went into a rage, kicking the floor non-stop until the floor was cracked by Kaneki-ken's kicks. Kaneki Ken wanted to grab the centipede with his hands, but his hands were tied behind his back with chains, so he couldn't touch his ears at all. Great. 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 Hahaha, the gecko was extremely excited and thrilled by Kaneki Ken's intense reaction, and was extremely happy in his heart. This kind of stimulation was incomparable to the kind of painful torture. It seemed that, because this stimulation was too strong, Kaneki Ken suddenly fell into a self-shielded spiritual world. In this world, Kaneki Ken was still sitting on the chair, with his hands and feet still tied. However, this is not the room where Kaneki Ken is imprisoned, but a sea of white flowers. The sea of flowers is endless, and even the sky is white. From the color of Kaneki Ken's inner spiritual world, it can be seen that Kaneki Ken's heart is so pure that there is no other color at all. This also shows how innocent Kaneki Ken's heart is. In this spiritual world, unlike the real world, Kaneki Ken's eyes are covered with bandages. These covered eyes seem to express that Kaneki Ken's heart cannot see the real world clearly, or cannot understand the real world. Chapter 982, Kamishiro Rise appears. In Kaneki Ken's spiritual world, there is another person who is facing Kaneki Ken, sitting in a sea of flowers with his hands on his knees. This person is not Kaneki Ken's mother, nor is it Shitomi Nagachika Hideyoshi, but Kamishiro Rise. It is not surprising that Kamishiro Rise appears in Kaneki Ken's spiritual world, because Kaneki Ken survived by transplanting Kamishiro Rise's organs. So from a certain level, Kaneki Ken and Kamishiro Rise's lives are already connected. Kamishiro Rise stood up, then reached out, and touched Kaneki Ken's face. I don't know if it was a centipede in the real world that caused Kaneki Ken to have an illusion. Anyway, Kaneki Ken felt the touch and the warmth of Rise's palm. This feeling made Kaneki Ken forget all the pain, and made Kaneki Ken mistakenly think that it was his mother who was touching him, and Kaneki Ken couldn't help but shout, "Mom, is that you?" Then Kamishiro Rise was amused by Kaneki Ken, and the laughter was like a bell. Very nice. Kaneki, do you miss your mother so much? Rise, Kamishiro said, and couldn't help but untie the bandage covering Kaneki Ken's eyes. Before the bandage was untied, Kaneki Ken recognized Rise Kamishiro just by hearing her voice, so he couldn't help but exclaimed, "Rise." As the bandage was untied, Kaneki Ken also saw Rise Kamishiro. This was not the first time Kaneki Ken saw Rise Kamishiro, and of course not the second time. Since transplanting Rise Kamishiro's Kikuha, Kaneki Ken often saw Rise Kamishiro. So if Kaneki Ken was surprised, it was not really a surprise. It can only be said that he didn't expect Rise Kamishiro to appear. It's only been a while since we last met, and you've become so embarrassed? This look is indeed a bit funny. Rise Kamishiro couldn't help but take the initiative to say to Kaneki Ken, "Don't want to hurt others, and would rather be hurt by others. Have you always lived like this?" Then Rise Kamishiro asked Kaneki Ken again. "Yeah. Because my mother told me not to hurt others," Kaneki Ken replied. Hahaha, this time, Kamishiro Rise laughed out loud, and this laughter was obviously mocking Kaneki Ken. "Kaneki, you are so naive. Just because of this, you live the way your mother lives. Don't you know that your mother died because of this?" Kamishiro Rise said. After saying that, Kaneki Ken's pale spiritual world suddenly changed, and then Kaneki Ken returned to his home and saw his mother, which made Kaneki Ken a little excited. "Mom." Kaneki Ken couldn't help but shout loudly, but found that his mother ignored him at all, and Kamishiro Rise appeared beside Kaneki Ken. Obviously, this is still in Kaneki Ken's spiritual world, and what he sees now is just Kaneki Ken's memory. Then Kaneki Ken saw his aunt coming to the house and asking his mother for the income from his father's work. "The money should belong to your mother, but your mother would rather be bullied by others than be moved. This is really stupid behavior," Kamishiro Rise said, patting Kaneki Ken on the shoulder. Then, the scene changes to show Kaneki Ken's mother working hard to make up for the family expenses. Finally, Kaneki Ken's mother dies at home. Chapter 983 Choice. Kaneki Ken could not help but rush forward, but he could not touch his mother. If your mother was not too kind, she would not be bullied, and she would not give your father's money to your aunt. If she did not give the money to your aunt, she would not have to work so hard, and she would not die of exhaustion in the end. It was your mother's kindness that killed you, and if you are still like your mother, you will soon kill yourself, Kaneki-ken. Kamishiro Rise continued to admonish Kaneki-ken. Then everything around changed again, turning back into the endless white sea of flowers, but several of the white roses in the white sea of flowers quietly changed into red spider lilies. The white roses in the sea of flowers, in addition to the flowers themselves being completely white, even the branches are white. In the spiritual world, Kaneki-ken was still sitting on the stool, his hands and feet were still tied, but Kamishiro Rise was no longer there. After several days of torture, Kaneki-ken's body seemed to be numb. Kaneki-ken's numbness made Gekko unable to enjoy the spiritual pleasure and joy. So on the 5th day, Gekko planned to torture Kaneki-ken mentally. On this day, Gekko tied up 2 members of the Bronze Tree organization, 1 man and 1 woman. This man and woman were the companions mentioned in the first class of Lun Wantang, and they were also a loving couple. Gekko grabbed Kaneki-ken's head and said to him, Kaneki-kun, I didn't expect you to have completely adapted to my torture so quickly. You are really amazing. Then let's play something else today. Do you see the couple in front of you? They are very loving. Now it's up to you to tell me which one to kill. You should be very grateful to them for taking care of you these days. Do you think you have become friends? Hahaha. The 2 young lovers tied up by Gekko looked at Gekko in horror. Because their mouths were sealed, they couldn't speak at all. Kaneki-ken was more nervous than ever at this time, and his entire spirit was close to the edge of collapse. How could Kaneki-ken have the mental ability to play such a game? If he chose, wouldn't he become a sinner? Moreover, this couple was one of the best companions, and they had taken good care of Kaneki-ken. If Kaneki-ken chose, he would most likely be hated by the one who was not chosen. At that time, Gekko might let the one who was not chosen abuse him, and then let Kaneki-ken suffer physical and mental torture. At that time, Kaneki-ken would definitely not be able to face any of them, and any of them would definitely dare to abuse Kaneki-ken. Kaneki-ken could not help but shake his head instinctively, very resistant. If you don't choose, I will kill them all. Seeing Kaneki-ken's resistance, Gekko suddenly became a little excited, and then threatened. But Kaneki-ken remained indifferent, and did not speak. Gekko did not rush to take action, but said, Kanki, let me put it another way. Which one of them do you want to save? As long as you speak, that person can live. How can I choose? Kill me. Kill me. Kaneki-ken refused. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 984 Game Over. The couple who were taking care of Kaneki-ken made a humming sound, as if they wanted to say something to Kaneki-ken. As they were forced to join the Bronze Tree, they knew clearly that Gekko was perverted. Seeing that Kaneki-ken refused to choose by dying, Gekko was a little angry, but Gekko was not in a hurry to kill Kaneki-ken. Instead, he shook Kaneki-ken's head and asked, man or woman? Tell me. Kill me. I won't choose. Kaneki-ken still said with a very firm attitude, and he was determined to die. Gekko naturally couldn't send Kaneki-ken off so easily. After all, Gekko's goal was not as simple as killing Kaneki-ken. Gekko let go of Kaneki-ken's head, then walked towards the couple, muttering, watch me, Kaneki-kun. As he said that, Gekko chose to grab the woman's head, and then lifted the woman up. When the man saw that Gekko grabbed his woman, he immediately became more excited, and the humming sound became much louder. Kaneki, do you want me to kill her? Haha, is that so? Gekko continued to ask Kaneki-ken, using this to increase Kaneki-ken's psychological pressure. The man moved in front of Gekko all of a sudden, and then hit Gekko's legs with his head, as if he wanted Gekko to let go of the woman in his hand and choose him. The man made such a move, because he knew that Kaneki-ken would not make a choice easily. Gekko felt his feet being touched, so he looked down at his feet, then raised his foot, and stepped on the man's head, saying, do you want me to let your woman go? What a loving move. But it's useless for you to tell me, you have to tell Kaneki-kun. After that, Gekko kicked the man to Kaneki-ken's feet. The man immediately looked at Kaneki-ken with pleading eyes, and then made a whimpering sound with his sealed mouth. Kaneki Ken didn't want to make a choice because Kaneki Ken didn't want to be a guilty person and didn't want to bear the sin. But sometimes, not making a choice is not a way to completely escape everything, because not making a choice is actually a choice. Kaneki Ken's eyes kept switching between the man and the woman. In this torment, Kaneki Ken wanted to make a choice impulsively several times, but his throat seemed to be stuck, and he couldn't make any sound. Still unwilling to make a choice? Kaneki-kun. Then I'll do it. Ha 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 ha. The last reminder of the gecko sounded again. After that, the gecko laughed crazily, and at the same time, the palm of his hand continued to increase the strength. Suddenly, the woman in the gecko's hand, because her hands and feet were bound, was like a worm, struggling and twisting violently, and making a frightened whimper. The man immediately looked back to see the situation, and his heart tightened up, and then he stared at Kaneki Ken with a determined and commanding look, and then made two powerful whimpers, which seemed to say to Kaneki Ken, "Choose me." Kaneki Ken saw the woman in the gecko's hand struggling, and his eyes were also staring at the boss, as if they were about to pop out. In the end, Kaneki Ken still didn't make a choice, or speak. Then he heard an explosion, and a horrible and bloody scene appeared in Kaneki Ken's eyes. The picture was frozen at that scene. The splattered blood even splashed on Kaneki Ken's face, causing Kaneki Ken to tremble. Chapter 985, Suffering the Consequences. The gecko was closest to the woman, so most of the blood splashed on his face, body, and hands. The woman fell straight to the ground, and a lot of blood oozed from the place where she collapsed. When the man turned his head and looked, his expression instantly became terrified, because the scene was really hard to describe in words. Kaneki Ken and the man were stunned, and time seemed to stand still. The death of the woman reminded Kaneki Ken of the death of Mrs. Ryoko. The two scenes were intertwined, and kept switching back and forth in Kaneki Ken's mind. Kaneki Ken suddenly collapsed and screamed, and the sound was much more miserable than when he was abused by the gecko. Ha 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 ha. The gecko's satisfied laughter also rang out, accompanied by Kaneki Ken's desperate and collapsed screams, which seemed so weird. The man also came back from his panic, and suddenly his frightened expression became angry and ferocious, with a strong murderous look in his eyes. However, the man did not look at the gecko, but looked at Kaneki Ken with murderous eyes, because he believed that it was Kaneki Ken who killed his woman. If Kaneki Ken had made a choice at that time, then his woman would not have died. Of course, if Kaneki Ken chose to save the woman, then the man would definitely die, but the man was not afraid of death, so he was willing for Kaneki Ken to do so. Although the man would not have resentment towards Kaneki Ken by doing this, what about the woman who survived? Exclamation mark. Will she blame Kaneki Ken? Even if not, I believe Kaneki Ken himself will be tortured by guilt. The man glared at Kaneki Ken, and his throat made a gurgling sound like a beast, like the sound of a car engine starting, but it was much more creepy. Until he finished shouting in one breath. Kaneki Ken took a deep breath, and his breathing was extremely rapid and heavy. Soon, Kaneki Ken noticed that the man's eyes were staring at him. That look made Kaneki Ken afraid to face it. The main reason for not daring to face it was not that Kaneki Ken was afraid, but that the guilt in his heart made Kaneki Ken unable to face the man in front of him. After a while, the laughter of the gecko also died down, and then the gecko walked towards Kaneki Ken, and stepped on the man's head. Kaneki, I didn't expect you to be so cold-blooded and ruthless. It's really gratifying. You had a chance to save her. I also gave you a chance. This time you can't blame yourself for not being able to choose to save people. It was your ruthlessness that killed this woman. The gecko said to Kaneki Ken in a very happy mood. Kaneki Ken did not refute, but the gecko's instigation made Kaneki Ken feel more guilty. After the gecko finished speaking, he suddenly grabbed the man's head again with his bloody hand. Seeing this action, Kaneki Ken's heart tightened, thinking that the gecko would kill this man even. Gecko did plan to do so, but he did not rush to do it. Instead, he tore off the tape that sealed the man's mouth first, and then said to the man, "You hate this little brat in front of you to the core. Do you want to eat him alive? I'm giving you this chance now. Go." Chapter 986, Escape is not a solution. You bastard, you will die. After the man was able to speak, he immediately roared at Kaneki Ken in a very ferocious manner. The man was so excited that his whole face trembled and his saliva sprayed all over Kaneki Ken's face. Finally, the man pounced on him and then bit and gnawed Kaneki Ken. Although Kaneki Ken's body has greatly improved its tolerance to pain, Kaneki Ken, who was being gnawed, did not feel too much pain, but the mental torture was indeed huge. But just as the man gnawed Kaneki Ken a few times, the gecko suddenly reached out and grabbed his head, and while he was gnawing, he killed the man with the same method. Kaneki Ken was immediately sprayed in the face, and the scene was really impossible to describe in words. This kind of stimulation directly made Kaneki Ken's spirit fall into an endless abyss. It is unknown how long this process lasted, and then the endless darkness suddenly turned white, and Kaneki Ken fell into his own spiritual world again. In the spiritual world, Kaneki Ken's body was shaking constantly, and his mouth was trembling up and down, while he was muttering, "It's none of my business. It's none of my business. It's none of my business." Kamishiro Rise was standing behind the stool, where Kaneki Ken was. Then Kamishiro Rise hugged Kaneki Ken's neck, and then leaned her face to Kaneki Ken's ear, and whispered, "You still haven't made any progress, Kaneki." Kamishiro Rise's action immediately made Kaneki Ken stiff again, and then he became quiet. "Kaneki, this happened. In fact, it's all because of you. Whether it's Mrs. Ryoko, Mr. Fugachi, or the couple killed by the gecko, they all died because of you," Kamishiro Rise said, while stroking Kaneki Ken's chest, as if to comfort Kaneki Ken. As he said that, everything around him changed, and Kaneki's memory was presented again. That was the scene when Mrs. Ryoko and Mr. Fugachi died. Kaneki Ken was an eyewitness of the incident, so these things were firmly planted in his heart. Kamishiro Rise then reached out her hand to Kaneki Ken's chin, then raised his head, as if she wanted Kaneki Ken to see these scenes. "Look. The death of Mrs. Ryoko and Mr. Fugachi was due to your inaction and hesitation. The death of this couple was also due to your inaction and hesitation. If you had made a choice at that time, one of them could have survived. If you were stronger than the gecko, you could have saved them both. Escape can't solve the problem. The first time was Mrs. Ryoko, the second time was Mr. Fugachi, and the third time was this pair of loving couples who died. Who's next? Will it be the other people in the antique? Or your sworn friend Nagachika Hideyoshi?" As Kamishiro Rise spoke, everything around her kept changing, and finally Nagachika Hideyoshi stood in front of Kaneki Ken. "Hideo." Kaneki Ken couldn't help but shout. "Kaneki, you will protect me, right?" Nagachika Hideyoshi in the spiritual world couldn't help but ask Kaneki Ken. Kaneki Ken still didn't answer immediately. At this moment, Kaneki Ken saw the gecko suddenly appear behind Nagachika and then crushed Nagachika head. Suddenly, Kaneki Ken shrank back in fear again. Chapter 987 Pushdown. After that, the scene changed again, and Kaneki Ken returned to the white sea of flowers again, but this time, it was obvious that some of the white roses had transformed into red spider lilies. "You hesitated again, Kaneki. Indecision can also kill people. But don't be nervous, what happened just now didn't really happen. Whether some things happen or not depends entirely on what you do at the time." Kamishiro Rise's voice sounded again. This time Kamishiro Rise squatted in front of Kaneki Ken and held Kaneki Ken's face. "Kaneki, don't you have something you want to protect? Are you born to be bullied by others? Don't you want to kill the gecko?" Kamishiro Rise then started to torture Kaneki Ken with 3 questions. Facing Rise Kamishiro's soul-searching question, Kaneki Ken cried and replied, "I have something I want to protect. I don't want to be bullied. I really want to kill the gecko. But I don't have the ability to protect it. I can only be bullied, let alone kill the gecko. I'm just an ordinary person." At this time, Rise Kamishiro suddenly kissed Kaneki Ken in the spiritual world. After a kiss, Rise Kamishiro said, "Are you going to accept me, Kaneki Ken?" During the kiss between Kaneki Ken and Rise Kamishiro, the white roses in the sea of flowers changed a lot, and suddenly more red flowers occupied the sea of flowers in Kaneki Ken's spiritual world. Kaneki Ken looked at Rise Kamishiro. I don't know if he was moved by Rise Kamishiro's kiss. Kaneki Ken suddenly broke free from the chain that bound his palms, and then he threw Rise Kamishiro down and pressed her under him. Suddenly, the white roses around Kaneki Ken also changed immediately, and then Kaneki Ken bit Rise Kamishiro's white neck. And Rise Kamishiro also closed her eyes, accepted everything, and did not resist. In the spiritual world, Ken Kaneki completely accepted Rise Kamishiro and greedily plundered Rise Kamishiro's wonderful warmth. This process turned Ken Kaneki's spiritual flower sea filled with white into a blood red. At night, CCG headquarters. A large number of investigators and Z government guards have already stood in neat rows and started to board the transport armored vehicles. All combatants wore uniform combat uniforms. Unlike plain clothes, combat uniforms were equipped with protective outer armor such as chest armor, knee pads, shoulder pads, leg armor, and arm armor. Kotaro Amon and Yukinori Shinohara were also wearing the same combat uniforms. Yukinori Shinohara was in charge of a team, which included Kotaro Amon, Kid Sato, and Juzo Suzuaya. Except for Kotaro Amon and Juzo Suzuaya who did not hold a cooking box, everyone else held one in their hands. The reason why Kotaro Amon didn't have one was because his Kyukin had been broken by Ken Kaneki, and the headquarters had not equipped Kotaro Amon until now. Although this was the case for Kid Sato, his new Kyukin had already been distributed by the headquarters. However, due to time constraints, the Kyukin that Sato Feng now had was a product of the experimental stage, that is, a semi-finished product, and was not very stable. The reason why Juzo Suzuaya didn't have a Kyukin was because Juzo Suzuaya himself didn't do his job well, so he naturally didn't have one either. Chapter 988 Rushing to District 11. At this time, Yukinori Shinohara was holding 2 Kyukin boxes in his hands. Then he walked towards Kotaro Amon and handed one of the Kyukin boxes to Kotaro Amon. Amon, take it. Yukinori Shinohara handed the Kyukin box to Kotaro Amon very seriously. What is this? Kotaro Amon took the Kyukin box and didn't quite understand what Yukinori Shinohara meant. This is a relic left by Mado for you. He told me before he died that if he died, he would give this Kyukin to you. This is the last thing he can do for you. Yukinori Shinohara replied. Hearing this, Amon Kotaro's heart ached, tears welled up in his eyes, and he couldn't help but murmured, Mado-senpai. Shinohara Yukinori patted Amon Kotaro on the shoulder, and then ordered everyone, get in the car. At this time, Suzuaya Juzo suddenly stopped everyone. Wait. Everyone looked at Suzuaya Juzo, and Shinohara Yukinori also asked him, Juzo, what are you doing? Where's my Kyukin? Suzuaya Juzo stretched out his hand and asked Shinohara Yukinori expectantly. No. Shinohara Yukinori answered directly. Why does he have it, but I don't? Suzuaya Juzo suddenly became unhappy. Get in the car. Shinohara Yukinori didn't want to explain more and ordered everyone to get in the car again. After that, everyone ignored Suzuaya Juzo and got in the car in an orderly manner. Seeing this, Suzuaya Juzo could only get on the transport armored vehicle first. After everyone got on the car, the hatch of the armored vehicle was closed, and the car started quickly and drove away from the CCG headquarters with the large traffic. Judging from the movements of CCG, these convoys are obviously going to District 11 to encircle Bronze Tree. District 20 Antique Cafe. In the Antique Cafe, all the members of Antique are ready to rush to the base of Bronze Tree in District 11 before CCG. Everyone is wearing casual clothes, and Bai Yu is also rarely wearing the old-fashioned clothes with a little chivalrous style that he wears in the world of Demon Slayer. Although Bai Yu's outfit was a very common outfit in the world of Demon Slayer, it looks very old in the highly modernized world of Gao. When Bai Yu appeared in this outfit, everyone in Antique was a little surprised, but no one said anything. After all, it was not work, and there was no requirement for dress, as long as they did not expose themselves. However, Bai Yu's outfit would indeed be quite conspicuous in the crowd, and I don't know what Bai Yu thinks. It was also the first time for Hinami to see Bai Yu dressed like this, and she couldn't help but feel that Bai Yu seemed to be more elegant like this. Bai Yu, what are you doing? Why are you wearing this? Change it quickly. Kirishima Tauka couldn't stand it and asked Bai Yu to change clothes. No, just wear this. Bai Yu answered very firmly. Perhaps only this dress can make Bai Yu find some comfort that Kirishima Tauka couldn't give. Seeing that Bai Yu's attitude was very firm, Kirishima Tauka no longer forced it. If it was for work, Kirishima Tauka would definitely not let Bai Yu wear this. At this time, Shikatarinchi pushed open the door of the antique shop and then said to everyone, "It's time to act." Chapter 989, Core Members of the Bronze Tree. 11. The core members of the Bronze Tree gathered on the roof of the commercial building occupied by the Bronze Tree. Among the people present was Kirishima, which showed that Kirishima still had a certain status in the Bronze Tree. In addition to Kirishima and the transvestite Nicole, the others were all unfamiliar faces. As for whether there was a leader among them, it was really hard to tell, because everyone was standing very casually. Among these people, the most conspicuous was naturally a tall man in a white coat. It seemed that he was the tallest among all the people. This tall man in white, wearing a half-face red mask, had short white hair, and seemed to be a cold and ruthless character. The other one was a man in a burgundy robe, who was also quite tall, only a little shorter than the man in the white coat. His hair was very long, with a thin long braid tied at the back, which gave him the feeling of a minister of the Qing dynasty. And he wore a full-face whiteboard mask on his face, with only a huge mouth pattern showing teeth printed on the mouth. Then there was a child sitting on the edge of the building, swinging his legs constantly. He was about 14 or 15 years old, wearing a hooded long skirt with two sleeves torn off. Because of the hood, he looked a bit like Little Red Riding Hood. But the weird thing was that the child was wrapped in bandages all over his body, without shoes, like a mummy, and his face could not be seen at all. But judging from the skirt, it was probably a girl. There were also two people wearing blue and purple hooded robes, who were shorter than the white-haired man in the white coat. The two stood side by side. Except for the slightly different patterns on the masks, there was no difference in other places. As for why Gecko did not appear here, it was probably because his mind was still on Kaneki-ken, so he did not show up. Todoro, CCG's actions are faster than expected. At this time, Little Red Riding Hood, who was wrapped in bandages, couldn't help but look at the flashing police lights on the road and said, "Ah." The white-haired man in the white coat couldn't help but hum. "Brother Ping is in charge of the main building." Then the white-haired man in a white coat, called Tadara by Little Red Riding Hood, couldn't help but order the brothers Ping, who were standing closely together. The brothers Ping were the two wearing blue and purple robes. Yes. The two brothers Ping immediately responded. "Otto is in charge of the auxiliary building." Then Tadara ordered Kirishima. "Yes." Kirishima also responded. "The rest is up to you, Noro." Tadara looked at the long braided man with a big mouth pattern and said, when giving orders to the brothers Ping and Kirishima, Tadara didn't even look at them, only Noro. Tadara looked at him. "Let's go, Gansky." Then Tadara walked away. Then the Little Red Riding Hood immediately got up and followed. As for the transvestite Nicole, Tadara didn't pay attention to her and didn't know if he had other things to do. Soon, the brothers Ping and the one called Noro also left the roof of the building. Soon, only Kirishima and the transvestite Nico were left on the roof. Nico was holding a small mirror and putting on makeup. This time, she was not wearing the stockings uniform of the old last time, but leather pants and leather jacket. "Hey, where's the gecko?" Kirishima asked Nico in a not very friendly way. Nico finished putting on makeup, put away her mirror, and replied in a nonchalant tone, "Who knows?" After that, Nico also walked away. Chapter 990. The war begins. Soon, the CCG convoy surrounded and blocked the commercial building. Just as the combat personnel of the armored vehicles got off, a flare was fired in the sky. Then a large number of Bronze Tree members who were ambushing at the windows of the commercial building popped out of the windows, and each of them held an automated thermal weapon in their hands. Then a series of gunshots rang out, completely breaking the calm atmosphere. The windows flashed with fire, and a large number of bullets were fired at the combat personnel who came out of the armored vehicles, knocking down a group of them. After the others reacted, they hid behind the cars and shouted loudly, "There is an ambush! There is an ambush!" The automated thermal weapons in the hands of the Bronze Tree members were naturally seized from the CCG branch. After all, District 11 has been completely occupied by the Bronze Tree, otherwise CCG would not have such a big reaction. As for why Gal used automated thermal weapons to deal with CCG, it is naturally because they are easy to use. Although the Gals have Kagoon, not all of them have feathered Kagoon, so these automated thermal weapons have become more useful things, which can contain and consume CCG. Those who have not yet gotten out of the car also hid in the car temporarily, but the enemy's firepower still has no intention of stopping. Although the armored vehicle is very strong, such a huge firepower tilted over at once, and the car glass was still hit by dense spider webs. Of course, the glass must not be penetrated. After all, it is bulletproof glass, but the dense spider webs on the glass greatly affect the line of sight, and the situation in front is completely unclear. When the personnel in the cab saw this situation, they immediately took out the protective shield and set it behind the car glass to strengthen the protection. Although the car glass itself is bulletproof, it still has its limits. With such a strong firepower, it is estimated that it will not last long, and the bulletproof glass will be like a piece of thin paper. The firepower lasted for half a minute and less than a minute, and then stopped, apparently because the bullets were used up. Put up the shield. Quick. 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 Merutse in the command vehicle immediately ordered. Then everyone took down the shield that was almost as tall as a person from the armored vehicle, and then pushed it out with a shield and built a protective wall in front of the armored vehicle. The protective wall had just been erected when the second round of firepower from the Bronze Tree members poured out again, as if they had already replaced the bullets. However, this time, because of the protective shield wall, the CCG was better protected. Take away the wounded who are not dead, the medical staff are in place, and the others will immediately fire back. Then Merutse immediately ordered again. These frontline fighters also immediately followed Merutse's instructions and dragged those companions who were shot, but still breathing and alive to the back of the armored vehicle. Amon Katero was also at the forefront at this time, holding a submachine gun in his hand, aiming at the window of the commercial building through the muzzle hole on the shield and firing. The same is true for Yukinori Shinohara. Although he is a special investigator, he is still a flesh and blood body, and it is impossible for him to force his way through the hail of bullets. Because in this situation, if he shows his head, he will be shot into a sieve. Even if Erima Takamori came, he would not dare to show his head without any protection. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 991, Reversal of Position. At the moment the battle started, Gecko had already found Kaneki Ken again. One day had passed since Gecko killed the innocent couple. Kaneki Ken was still sitting on the stool with his head down, but the difference from before was that Kaneki Ken's hair had turned white, and it seemed that it had turned white within a day. It is conceivable that Kaneki Ken's spirit was greatly tortured. Kanki, the happy time is over. The white crane is attacking here, and fighting with them is my job. I can't have fun with you anymore. Gecko walked in front of Kaneki Ken, as if he was going to say goodbye to Kaneki Ken. But in fact, Gecko was here to send Kaneki off and eat Kaneki Ken alive. As long as they don't hinder the existence of the Bronze Tree, they will be eradicated. Of course, humans are not to be mentioned, and gals are no exception. As long as gals that oppose the Bronze Tree's ideas will be eradicated. The place where you work is called Antiques, right? I'll tell you one last secret. Antiques are also stumbling blocks that the Bronze Tree wants to eradicate. Hahaha. As he said that, the Gecko laughed wildly again, as if he wanted to make Kaneki Ken feel bad before he was eaten by him. Kaneki Ken ignored him and still lowered his head. I don't know if he was still sleeping. Kaneki, let me eat you now and complete your last mission. The Gecko put his face close to him, his eyes wide open, and he looked like a lunatic. Kaneki Ken couldn't help but sneer. I don't know if it was because he hadn't spoken for too long, or for some other reason. This sneer was extremely sharp, like a bell, and very much like a woman's sneer. This laughter made the Gecko shrink his face back, and then his heart tightened, and his face trembled. Suddenly, the Gecko saw that Kaneki Ken, who was sitting on the stool, suddenly turned into Kamishiro Rise. Of course, this was just an illusion caused by the Gecko's fear. Then Kaneki Ken raised his head and said, "You are such a boring man." And the words Kaneki Ken said were exactly what Kamishiro Rise had said to mock the Gecko before. The gecko shook his head violently, and then he saw that it was not Kamishiro Rise who was sitting on the stool, but Kaneki Ken. Hahaha, the gecko couldn't help but laugh again. It's really annoying. Kaneki. After saying that, the gecko's scales suddenly released from the back waist and stabbed towards the position where Kaneki Ken was. At this time, Kaneki Ken's figure also moved violently, and there was only the sound of the chain breaking, and Kaneki Ken's figure had disappeared from the position. Gecko's Kagun missed, then he stabbed the stool backwards and continued to stab into the ground. The sudden change surprised Gecko. He never thought that Kaneki Ken could still resist. Kaneki Ken, who twisted his arms to break free from the chain, flipped in the air and fell on Gecko's back. Then he used the chain he broke free from to strangle Gecko's neck tightly, as if he was going to strangle Gecko to death. You are the one who deserves to die. Kaneki Ken, who was stepping on Gecko's back, whispered in Gecko's ear. At this time, Kaneki Ken's tone changed a lot, becoming extremely cold and indifferent. Kaneki Ken's rebuttal made Gecko extremely angry and gritting his teeth. Feeling the suffocation of being strangled by the chain, Gecko instinctively pulled the chain in front of his neck with both hands. In the end, in a contest of strength, Gecko forcibly pulled off the chain. When Kaneki Ken saw the chain being pulled away by the gecko, he immediately stepped on the gecko's back and jumped out. Chapter 992 Acting Alone. Except for Yoshimura Kozen and Hinami, the rest of the antiques and Tsukiyama had already infiltrated the bronze tree. At the moment the gunshots rang out, Bai Yu tore off the robe of the Bronze Tree organization, put on the fox mask, and said to Sifeng Lianshi, "Uncle Sifeng, I will not follow you. I have important things to do." "What is it?" Sifeng Lianshi looked at Bai Yu in confusion. "Clean up the bronze tree." Bai Yu did not hide anything, and said very directly. Hearing this, Shigeo Rinshi immediately felt that Bai Yu was fooling around, so he angrily shouted, "Nonsense." Kirishima Talca did not expect Bai Yu to say such a thing. She looked at Bai Yu somewhat at a loss, then grabbed Bai Yu and said, "Bai Yu, are you crazy? We are here to rescue Kaneki this time. Even if you are a half Kakashi, the bronze tree cannot be destroyed by you alone." Kirishima Talca's words made the others look horrified. Everyone looked at Bai Yu. Although Shigeo Rinshi had taken Bai Yu out many times and had a certain judgment of Bai Yu's strength, he never thought that Bai Yu would be a half Kakashi. You must know that, although Shigeo Rinshi was rated as SS level by CCG, Shigeo Rinshi is not a Kakashi, nor a half Kakashi. Because the condition for becoming a Kakashi is to have multiple Kakashi bags, only Kakashi can obtain multiple Kakashi bags, and Shigeo Rinshi has never Kakashi. If Bai Yu is really a half Kakashi, this means that Bai Yu has experienced Kakashi. After all, Shihou Rinshi didn't know the existence of the system, so he could only attribute this to Konoku. Nishio Kinshi didn't expect that Bai Yu, who was about the same age as him, would actually be a half Kaku. This comparison, the huge gap, made him extremely shocked. Tsukiyama didn't expect Bai Yu to be a ruthless character hidden in the antique. No wonder he attacked him as soon as he met him. It turned out to be like this. Bai Yu didn't say much, but said, "I will help you try to attract the attention of CCG and Bronze Tree, just as if we are acting separately. Then I'll go with you." Kirishima Talca said immediately. "No, it's too dangerous for you to follow me." Bai Yu immediately refused. "Talca-chan, I know you came to Area 11. In addition to rescuing Kaneki, you actually want to meet your brother face to face. Kaneki Ken was captured by Bronze Tree, and you were also injured at that time. The wound was caused by Yukaku. When I asked you who injured you, you refused to say. Obviously, you are protecting your brother Otto, right?" Bai Yu then asked Kirishima Talca. The reason why Bai Yu knew that Kirishima Talca's wound was caused by Yu was because he had seen Kirishima Talca's wound in private. Bai Yu had guessed this at the time because Yoshimura Kozen had told Bai Yu before that Kirishima Talca had a younger brother in the Bronze Tree. "Don't worry, if I meet Otto, I won't hurt him. I will definitely tie him up and bring him back to see you," Bai Yu added. The reason why Bai Yu brought up this topic was actually to be able to act alone. After all, Bai Yu had to clean up, and the scene would certainly be chaotic by then, so Bai Yu didn't want Kirishima Talca to follow him. After saying that, Bai Yu broke away from Kirishima Tauka's hand, then looked at Shikatarinshi, and finally flashed away. Shikatarinshi didn't chase after him, but let Bai Yu do this time. Chapter 993 Experimental Kyukin. On the other side, CCG was still in a relatively passive position. Sato Feng was also a little frustrated, and then he untied his Kyukin box. The Kyukin box Sato Feng used this time was no longer the previous shield defensive Kyukin, but a bow-shaped Kyukin. The whole bow was 1 meter long, and it was quite large in the hand. The most special thing was that this bow had no string, and it seemed to be a bow that could not be pulled. Sato Feng stretched out his hand and gently wiped the sharp bow wall, and then Sato Feng's palm was immediately cut open with a shallow blood wound, and the blood flowed onto the Kyukin. Then the two sides of the bow wall were arranged side by side like reflective stickers, and the rectangular crystals embedded in the bow wall emitted red light, as if a light bulb was lit. The long red lights on the bow body seemed to be like energy display lights, showing the remaining energy. Then a translucent string similar to tendon tissue appeared at the end of the bow wall, and then the string also emitted a red light. Sato Feng immediately pulled the string with his hand, and the string was actually bent. As Sato Feng pulled, a red arrow gradually appeared. Sato Feng immediately aimed at a bronze tree member on the window, and then as Sato Feng loosened the string, the light arrow turned into a stream of light and shot out, and the speed was not much slower than a bullet. When the light arrow was shot out, it suddenly turned into a crystallized entity. Judging from Sato Feng's method of use, the use of this Kyukin seems to have to be activated with blood. It must be said that Sato Feng is still very good at using shooting weapons. The first arrow directly hit the head of a bronze tree member in the window. The bronze tree member who was shot fell backwards stiffly. However, the death of a single bronze tree member did not have a great impact on the battle situation. Amonkatero looked at Sato Feng's newly equipped Kyukin, and couldn't help but look at the Kyukin box he had placed next to him. The Kyukin that Mado gave Amonkatero was a very traditional Kyukin for close combat. Amonkatero had seen Mado show him, so his Kyukin was not suitable for the current situation. Sato Feng used an experimental one in the development stage, so it had the ability to attack from a distance. Amid the dense gunfire, there was a sound of anti-material sniper weapon bullets being fired. Sniper weapons, especially anti-material sniper weapons, are more powerful than firearms, and when sniper weapons are not equipped with silencers, the sound is very terrifying and easy to distinguish. Suddenly, a few meters away from Amonkatero, something happened. A protective shield in front of a person was directly broken, and the person hiding behind the protective shield had his heart pierced directly, and then fell to the ground. The blood dyed the surrounding 2 or 3 square meters of ground red within a few seconds. There's a sniper. There's a sniper. Everyone be careful. Everyone be careful. Suddenly, a roll-like reminder sounded around. Sato, quickly kill the sniper upstairs. Shinohara Yukinori immediately ordered Sato Feng. Yes. Sato Feng did not delay at all and retreated to the back of the armored vehicle and then chose a better position for counter-sniping. What Sato Feng used for counter-sniping was naturally the Kyukin in his hand. Sato Feng put on a single eye aiming lens on his eye and then closed the other eye and began to search for the target. Chapter 994, Satoki's Sniper Showdown. Sato Feng, who had received professional training and had always been an excellent student, quickly found a window at a corner and found the position of the sniper. The sniper did not notice that Sato Feng immediately pulled the bow to its full length and pressed a button on the bow handle. As the button was pressed, the long red light on the bow suddenly became brighter, and then the whole bow emitted a dazzling red light. The most dazzling thing was the light arrow, which was so dazzling that it turned into a dazzling white, and then a light bar went out. Then, Sato Feng's hand loosened the arrow string, and the light arrow turned into a stream of light and shot out. This time, the speed of the light arrow was even faster than before, like a flash of lightning. The bronze member who used the sniper was tightly wrapped by Kaku, because he was a Gao of Kaku, leaving only the muzzle and lens outside. This is why Sato Feng pressed the strengthening button to strengthen the power of the arrow before loosening the string this time. If it is not enhanced, it is unlikely to penetrate the Kagoon. However, although the enhancement key is easy to use, it takes a little time, which is sometimes very fatal. Moreover, drawing the bow, aiming, and shooting are all processes that test the user's brain and body. If the user's level is not good, he can't play this kind of Kyukin at all. Sato Feng can use this experimental weapon because Sato Feng has a good brain, a talent for shooting, and a brilliant record. The enhanced arrow directly penetrated the Kagun of the bronze tree sniper and then penetrated his head. After the arrow was shot, Sato Feng immediately retreated behind the armored vehicle. Sure enough, other snipers had already shot at Sato Feng's position. After the bullet hit the thick armor, the bullet head was embedded in it. Fortunately, Sato Feng was hiding behind the armored vehicle. If Sato Feng was hiding on the protective shield, he would probably have died just now. At this point, Sato Feng also knew that he was likely to be targeted by the sniper on the opposite side, so he was not in a hurry to show his head. Because it was good for the other party to target him, at least the other people in front would not be sniped. Sato Feng adjusted his breathing, still not in a hurry to show his head or change position, but waited for the other party's reaction. After about 10 seconds, the other party saw that Sato Feng did not come out, and he could not wait any longer, so he pulled the trigger at the position where Sato Feng was hiding. Each shot was aimed at the same position in order to penetrate the armor and hit Sato Feng hiding behind. The two consecutive extremely penetrating explosions stood out in the dense gunfire, allowing Sato Feng to know the number of the other side. 3 more. Sato Feng murmured, and then moved to the other side. Because he felt the slight vibration of the armored vehicle, after sticking to it, Sato Feng knew the other party's intention. Then 3 more explosions penetrated, and then a bullet shot out from Sato Feng's shoulder through the armor, and then bounced off, after hitting the ground. If Sato Feng had not moved his position just now, the bullet would have hit his upper body. And Sato Feng was no exception. He immediately seized the extremely short time for the other party to reload, and then rolled over to the back of another armored vehicle. Chapter 995. Incident. Amen. The enemy's approximate position. Because Sato Feng didn't dare to show his head, he had to ask for help from Carmen Kotero loudly. Hearing this, Carmen Kotero immediately started looking for him, but because of the distance, it was difficult for Carmen Kotero to find the sniper with his naked eyes, and he couldn't find him after searching for a long time. So, Carmen Kotero immediately recalled the approximate location of the previous gunshot, and then said, "It's probably at the corner window on the 8th floor. Hearing this, Sato Feng was also ready for blind shooting. Just when Sato Feng was waiting for the other party to shoot again, he found that the other party had not fired yet, which made Sato Feng think that the other party was waiting for him again. For the sake of caution, Sato Feng had to continue waiting to analyze the situation. As time went on, Carmen Kotero, who was at the forefront, soon found that the enemy's firepower seemed to have weakened. Did they run out of bullets? Or were they planning to retreat? Sato Feng soon realized that the gunshots did not seem as strong as before, and felt strange in his heart, so he asked Ammon Kotero, "Ammon, what's going on?" "I don't know, it seems that something happened." Shinohara Yukinori also felt this situation. As time went by, the fire in the window was obviously reduced by half, and the gunshots were much smaller. Then, Shinohara Yukinori saw that the members of the bronze tree suddenly fired into the building, as if something had happened in the building. Soon, the CCG personnel also stopped firing, and the gunshots suddenly became much smaller. This time, there were only the gunshots of the bronze tree members firing into the building, and the faint screams from the building, and the ping-pong sounds of bullets being bounced off. At this time, Suzuya Juzo got a motorcycle from somewhere. After the firepower exchange ended, he drove the motorcycle towards the commercial building, and then performed a flying motorcycle acrobatics in front of all CCG. Finally, Suzuya Juzo used the help of the motorcycle to flip into the building. And the one who caused this change was naturally the intervention of Bai Yu. After separating from Kirishima Taoka, Bai Yu rushed over following the sound of gunfire. After hearing the sound of anti-material sniper rifles, Bai Yu went to find the sniper first. This is why Sato Feng suddenly couldn't wait for the sniper to shoot again. After that, Bai Yu went all the way down to the 3rd floor and cleaned up the bronze tree members who fired on the 3rd floor. Because there were so many members on the third floor, Bai Yu naturally needed some time. After Suzuha Juzo rolled into the building, he rolled on the ground, then took out the submachine gun on his waist, and executed those Bronze Tree members who turned their backs to him, because they were shooting at Bai Yu. The sound of gunfire, accompanied by Suzuha Juzo's laughter, echoed in the building. With the help of Suzuha Juzo, all the Bronze Tree members on the third floor were cleared out. The gunfire and screams stopped abruptly. Others outside, facing the situation of silence, did not rush to take action. After all, CCG had no information about what happened inside. Giselle, what's going on inside? Shinohara Yukinori used his headset to contact Suzuha Juzo, who was the first to enter the building. Suzuha Juzo, who was inside the building, threw his gun to the ground, then took out his butterfly knife and said, "It seems there is a powerful guy. He is wearing a fox mask." Because the headset was connected, everyone except Shinohara Yukinori could hear it. When Amon Kotaro heard this, his whole face changed. Chapter 996 Fearless. The gecko pulled off the chain, his chest heaving and breathing heavily. It seemed that he was indeed strangled. Kaneki Ken stood still and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with his palm, and then said with great disgust, "Your meat is really disgusting." Hearing this, the gecko gradually felt the coolness on his neck and couldn't help but reach out to touch his neck, and then the gecko found that Kaneki Ken had bitten off a piece of meat from his neck. "You guy, you actually ate my meat," the gecko said in surprise. Although surprised, it was not fearful, but I didn't expect Kaneki Ken to start counterattacking. The angry gecko, the two scales on his lower back pounced on Kaneki Ken like a giant python. The speed was extremely fast. If it was the previous Kaneki Ken, he would definitely not be able to react. But now Kaneki Ken no longer resists his identity and completely accepts the fact that he is a Gao. At the same time, he accepts the intimate fusion of Kamishiro Rise's cells and himself. Now Kaneki Ken can be said to be Kamishiro Rise himself, but not completely Kamishiro Rise, because Kaneki Ken still has his own thoughts. So it is impossible for Kaneki Ken to beat the gecko alone, but with Kamishiro Rise's 100% help, the situation is different. Kaneki Ken is also very fast. The whole person is like a smart monkey, passing through the gap between the two scales, and then the two scales of the gecko pierced the concrete floor covered with tiles. Then Kaneki Ken grabbed the scales of the gecko with his palm and swung it, and the whole person flipped onto the scales of the gecko, and then Kaneki Ken ran on the scales and rushed towards the gecko. When he was 2 meters away from the gecko, Kaneki Ken suddenly jumped up, then turned around and kicked the gecko's head hard, as if he was going to kick the gecko's head to pieces. The whole process seemed complicated, but in the blink of an eye, Kaneki Ken's leg had already kicked over. The gecko was not a lazy guy. After all, he was rated S level by CCG, so how could he say that his strength was only strong, not weak? So the gecko suddenly grabbed with both hands and tightly grasped the leg kicked by Kaneki Ken, and then said with a smirk, "Got it, little mouse." After that, the gecko was going to use force to break Kaneki Ken's leg. Kaneki Ken didn't seem to care about this at all. He twisted his waist and forcibly broke his leg. That kind of twisting was not an ordinary break, but a 360-degree twist. Not only the bones, but also the outer muscles were twisted into a twist. Because of the twisting of his calf, Kaneki Ken's body was also driven to flip over again, and then he changed his other leg and kicked the gecko hard. The gecko did not expect Kaneki Ken to make such an attack. Such a stupid move that hurt himself 1,000 times and hurt the enemy 100 times. The gecko was kicked by Kaneki Ken and flew more than 10 meters away, and then rolled on the ground and finally stopped by using his face as a brake. Kaneki Ken was not affected by the twisting of his feet, but stood still, as if nothing had happened, as if he did not feel any pain. Then, Kaneki Ken's leg automatically twisted back, like a wound-up spring, and reversed itself. In less than 2 seconds, it was completely restored to its original state. This shows how extraordinary Kamishiro Rise's recovery ability is. After Kaneki Ken completely accepted Kamishiro Rise's cells, he showed the level that Kamishiro Rise should have, and even surpassed Kamishiro Rise himself. Kaneki Ken looked at the gecko that was kicked away. His left one-eyed eye was already exposed. He said with a hint of sarcasm, "Do you think I still care about this little pain now?" Chapter 997 Breakthrough. After hearing Suzuha Juzou say that there was a guy wearing a fox mask in the building, Amon Kotaro rushed out with the Kyukin box. Seeing this, Shinohara Yukinori immediately shouted to Amon Kotaro, who rushed out recklessly, Amon, come back." Shinohara Yukinori also learned about the Ghoul codenamed Fox, but there is not much information about Fox. The two people who have mainly come into contact with Fox are Mado and Amon Kotaro. Shinohara Yukinori has not come into contact with Fox, so he has no judgment on how dangerous Fox is. However, Mado rated Fox at S level, and Mado died at the hands of Fox, which already shows that Fox is not weak. But, isn't Fox a Ghoul in Area 20? Why did he appear in Area 11? What is his purpose in Area 11? Was the change in the building really caused by him? If so, why did he do this? Why did he help CCG open a breakthrough? Even if the fox has the behavior of harming its own kind, it should not be based on the premise of helping CCG. At this time, after hearing this sentence in the headset, Sato Feng immediately rushed out of the armored vehicle and chased after Amon Kotaro. Sato Feng was not calling Amon Kotaro, but also wanted to meet the fox again. Because of the abnormal behavior of the fox in the 20th district, Sato Feng was a little puzzled, so the fox still attracted Sato Feng. Although Sato Feng also knew that it was very abnormal for the fox to appear in the 11th district, it was for this reason that he had to personally confirm whether it was a fox. Sato, don't act on your own. Shinohara Yukinori saw Sato Feng rushing out and couldn't help but yelled loudly. It's okay for Suzuha Juzou to disobey orders, but Amon Kotaro and Sato Feng did the same. This kind of behavior may be punished sometimes. Everyone assault. At this time, Merutse's highest order had been issued, and Merutse's loud and powerful voice rang in everyone's ears at the same time. Then CCG's troops poured into the Bronze Tree's stronghold. Of course, not everyone rushed to the third floor, where Bai Yu was. After entering the commercial center, a large number of people dispersed to different places in the commercial building in batches. After all, Bai Yu was not very famous in CCG, so it was unlikely that he would be surrounded. In addition, CCG's target was Bronze Tree, not just Bai Yu, so it was naturally impossible to put too much manpower on Bai Yu. In addition to a group of machine gunners on the third floor, there were also snipers on the upper floors. Many members of Bronze Tree were ambushed in various places in the commercial building. The purpose was to launch another round of surprise attacks when CCG attacked. After Bai Yu dealt with all the machine gunners of Bronze Tree on the third floor, he immediately noticed Suzuha Juzou by the window. Bai Yu had no intention of killing humans, but Bai Yu did not mean to evacuate or avoid the battle. Because not having the intention to kill does not mean that he will not take action, nor does it mean that Bai Yu will run. As long as he knocks the opponent unconscious or makes him lose his combat effectiveness, he can save his life. And Suzuha Juzou felt the pressure from Bai Yu, which is why Suzuha Juzou said Bai Yu was a powerful guy. Because Suzuha Juzou did not have Kyukin, he could only use his butterfly knife to fight the enemy. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 998, Against Suzuha Juzou. However, Bai Yu did not mean to laugh at Suzuha Juzou for using a butterfly knife. In an instant, Bai Yu's figure moved, and in the blink of an eye, he was already in front of Suzuha Juzou. So fast. Suzuha Juzou was also shocked by Bai Yu's speed, and then Bai Yu's knife was already slashing towards Suzuha Juzou's chest. The butterfly knife in Suzuha Juzou's hand immediately danced, and then blocked it, and Suzuha Juzou really blocked it. However, although it was blocked, Bai Yu's knife was extremely hard. Even Kyukin and Kagun of the same level could not block Bai Yu's knife. Therefore, the next second, Suzuya Juzo's butterfly knife was cut off by Bai Yu, and the knife again cut through the chest armor of Suzuya Juzo's combat protective suit, and finally left a long bloody wound on Suzuya Juzo's chest. Bai Yu's control of the attack was very accurate. Bai Yu's attack only cut through Suzuya Juzo's dermis, and did not go deeper. Such an attack will only make people feel pain, and it will not affect life. However, the wound will definitely bleed. Although one wound will not cause anything, 2, 3, or even more wounds will gradually change the situation. Once the human body loses a certain amount of blood, it will go into shock, which will be extremely dangerous. However, Bai Yu will not let Suzuya Juzo go into shock. At most, he will make his body weak. If Bai Yu wants, the knife just now can cut into Suzuya Juzo's heart and lungs, or even completely cut off Suzuya Juzo's body. Of course, this does not mean that Suzuya Juzo is not strong enough. You must know that Suzuya Juzo blocked Bai Yu's attack, but because the butterfly knife is not strong enough, Bai Yu's attack can go down. If Suzuya Juzo is given a Kyukin that can fight against Bai Yu's knife, the situation will be different. Of course, this can only allow Suzuya Juzo to hold on for a little longer. It is still unlikely for Suzuya Juzo to defeat Bai Yu, because Bai Yu still has a trump card on him. After being chopped, Suzuya Juzo took a few steps back, and he was still frightened. Suzuya Juzo had never thought that it was the result of Bai Yu's mercy. Suzuya Juzo didn't care too much about the wound on his chest. After all, this little injury was nothing to a person like Suzuya Juzo who had a tendency to self-harm and violence. Without any pause, Suzuya Juzo retreated and immediately pulled out the shuriken inserted in his waist and then threw it towards Bai Yu. Compared with Bai Yu's mercy, Suzuya Juzo's death hand was a deadly one. The trajectory of the shuriken was towards Bai Yu's heart, neck, head and crotch. It's easy to understand other parts, but this crotch is a bit strange. Perhaps it's because Suzuya Juzo has suffered this special treatment before. Judging from Suzuya Juzo's fighting style, it can be seen that Suzuya Juzo is a very crazy guy in battle, and he fights completely by relying on his body's instincts. However, it must be said that Suzuya Juzo's darts were very accurate. If it were the previous Kaneki Ken, it would be unlikely that he would be able to dodge them. However, Bai Yu was different. Bai Yu had no problem blocking bullets, so he could naturally block darts. Chapter 999, Bottle Brothers vs. Gay Friends. Bai Yu used the trajectory of the sword swinging with Strike Tide to easily block the shuriken thrown by Suzuya Juzo. The trajectory of the sword swinging with Strike Tide in water breathing is very learned. The sword path is not straight, but can be twisted. Just like water, it is invisible. Dang dang dang, only a few crisp collision sounds and sparks splashed in the darkness were heard, and the three shuriken changed their trajectory and bounced to other places. At this time, Suzuya Juzo rolled forward, then picked up the two submachine guns that had just been thrown on the ground, and finally half crouched on the ground, raised the gun with both hands, and pulled the trigger at Bai Yu. To a series of bullets were fired, and bullets flew out one by one. At the moment the bullets were fired, Bai Yu's figure had already begun to move. Just when the bullets were about to hit Bai Yu's figure just left the original position. Suzuya Juzo followed Bai Yu's movement trajectory and moved the muzzle of his gun, but he was still a little slow. Although the bullets followed Bai Yu, each bullet just brushed past Bai Yu and then missed. Bai Yu took advantage of the rapid flash of his body to approach Suzuya Juzo again. Suzuya Juzo laughed while firing and seemed to enjoy this feeling. Shinohara Yukinori heard Suzuya Juzo's laughter and the sound of gunfire coming from the headset and couldn't help asking, "Yuzo, what's going on over there?" Of course it's an extremely fun situation. "Uncle Shinohara, do you want to come over and play?" Suzuya Juzo also invited Shinohara Yukinori. Hearing such a very frivolous answer, Shinohara Yukinori didn't know whether he should support Suzuya Juzo. "Amon, have you met up with Juzo?" Shinohara Yukinori had no choice but to ask Amon again. At this time, Amon Katero, who was rushing to the third floor, suddenly stopped and said in a heavy tone, "It may be difficult to get through to the Jizo for the time being. I met the Ping brothers." The reason why Amon Kotaro recognized the Ping brothers was that he knew them from the information of the known personnel of the Bronze Tree. At this time, Sato Feng also came to Amon Kotaro's side. Seeing the Ping brothers blocking in front of him, Sato Feng's brows also frowned. When Shinohara Yukinori heard what Amon said, he couldn't help but worry about Amon Kotaro. The Ping brothers were rated as S-level gals. This S-level does not refer to two, but to the fact that the two brothers have S-level strength together. Then be careful, I will go to support immediately after I finish dealing with this. Shinohara Yukinori reminded immediately. Yeah. Amon Kotaro hummed. Amon Kotaro was not very sure about the S-level gal, but Amon Kotaro knew that he could not retreat, so he didn't think about it anymore and immediately released his Kyukin. The Kyukin that Mado left for Amon Kotaro is a huge square blade. Because it is made of the Kaki of an S-rank gal, it is much stronger than the stick hammer that Amon Kotaro used before. If Amon Kotaro used this Kyukin to deal with Kaneki Ken, it is really possible to cut off Kaneki Ken's scaled Kaki. Instructor Shinohara, don't worry, I'm still here. At this time, Sato Feng took the initiative to say to Shinohara Yukinori on the other end of the headset. Chapter 1000, Suzuya Juzo's Escape. The tactical communication headsets worn by Kotaro Amon and Feng Sato cannot communicate with everyone, but only with the people in their respective teams. The reason why Murata-sei can issue instructions to everyone is because Murata-sei's side is the main station, and all tactical communication headsets can receive the signal from the main station. The headset worn by the captain of each team is also a switchboard. Only the switchboard can actively communicate with the main station. The other team members wear the auxiliary machine, which can only communicate between teams and receive information and instructions from the main station. Soon, the bullets in the submachine gun were used up by Suzuya Juzo. Suzuya Juzo had no idea of changing the bullets, and changing the bullets takes time. For a powerful person like Bai Yu, there is no time to change the bullets. Suzuya Juzo is also very clear about this, so when there are no bullets in the gun, Suzuya Juzo immediately dropped the gun and escaped through the window. It can be said that Suzuya Juzo's sudden retreat has made the best use of the 36 stratagems of running away. This also shows that Suzuya Juzo is not stupid. He knows that he can't win and still knows how to run. Although running away is not a glorious thing at sometimes, in this case, Suzuya Juzo's choice to run away is actually a very wise choice. Because Suzuya Juzo has no weapon that can deal with Bai Yu, there is no need to fight. Just when Suzuya Juzo turned around, Bai Yu's knife immediately stabbed into Suzuya Juzo's thigh. Suzuya Juzo didn't care about the pain in his leg and turned around and threw a shuriken at Bai Yu's head. Bai Yu immediately moved to block, and Suzuya Juzo took this opportunity to jump back and flip out of the window. Bai Yu walked to the window and looked down, and then saw Suzuya Juzo's whole body on the edge of the window on the second floor. Suzuya Juzo saw Bai Yu's head sticking out of the window and couldn't help but grin at Bai Yu, and then a shuriken flew out of his other hand, and Bai Yu immediately retracted his head. At this time, Suzuya Juzo took the opportunity to climb into the second floor. Bai Yu looked out again and found that Suzuya Juzo was gone, so he did not choose to chase him. After all, Bai Yu's goal was not to kill Suzuya Juzo. The most important thing was that Bai Yu had more important things to do, which was to use the Ghost Devourer to devour these dead Bronze Tree members and replenish his own ghost power. There were about 50 or 60 members of the Bronze Tree who died on the third floor, which was quite a lot, so Bai Yu estimated that it would take some time to devour them. Suzuya Juzo, who had climbed into the second floor, approached the window. Although he did not care about the injury, he immediately took out the emergency bandage in his pocket and bandaged his thigh. What a powerful guy. It would be great if there was a Kyukin, Suzuya Juzo said with a silly smile. On the other side, Amon Kotaro and Sato Feng had already fought with the Ping brothers. After the devil training, Amon Kotaro was much stronger than before. In addition, the death of Mado had a great impact on Amon Kotaro. Amon Kotaro, who survived, was much stronger than before. The change in his heart allowed Kotaro Amon to truly use all of his strength. With the blessing of the more powerful Kyukin and the assistance of Sato Feng, Kotaro Amon was able to suppress the Ping brothers. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.